Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Rachel. I am an Associate Director of Alumni Engagement here at Reed College. I generally work with young alumni. I do not work with the Reed Career Alliance usually, but I am here today and very excited. My mom actually is a teacher, and so I love all things education. I can't wait to hear our panelists. I just want to go over a brief housekeeping and then introduce the leaders of the panel, and that'll be it for me. So please mute yourselves if you're not speaking. We will be recording this event to be available on request to the Reed community. You are welcome to keep your camera on if you'd prefer not to appear on camera. Now's the time to turn it off. The format for this event will be 10 minutes for panelist introductions, 55 minutes of our moderators asking questions of panelists, and 20 minutes of open Q&A from the audience. You can submit questions throughout the session in the Zoom chat bar, which we can answer later during the Q&A. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce Liz, class of 2001, and Dean, class of 2014. Liz is an English major and manages research and evaluation at PPS and has worked in a variety of research and evaluation roles in education since 2005. And her work is focused on equity and driven by the mission to work to close the opportunity gap, which I know she's looking forward to talking more about. Dean was a linguistics major and received his Master's of Science in Education, I believe is what an MSD is, but if not, correct me later, in intercultural communication from UPenn in 2018, and spent the last 5 years teaching high school English in Denver, rather. Dean recently moved back to Portland, where this fall he will be a substitute teacher for Portland Public Schools. So welcome, Liz and Dean, and take it away.
Hi, everybody. I think it's funny that I put in my bio that I'm an English major. I was an English major at Reed College. And after Reed, went on and got a master's in education and a PhD and also a law degree. And over the last few years, I've been thinking about my own path and how that led me to education and how to better support others who graduate from Reed, who, like me, kind of didn't know what to do with our degrees. What do you do with an English major? And thinking through how to better support young alumni and others who might want to pursue career pathways in education. Last year, I was co-chair of the Reed Career Alliance, and through that work was able to bring this about. And what this is a brand new network here in the Reed Alumni Association, where we are forming an alliance across Reed alumni who are educators in PreK-12 education. And this is our first event, and we're really excited to bring all of these amazing educators together to share their experiences about how they achieved their dream to be an educator, and how their experience at Reed and after brought them to where they are today. And I want to just thank Amy Thorne, who's not here, Amy Hess, and Rachel Armitage, who are here from Reed, who were able to support this work, and also folks on the Reed Career Alliance and the Reed Alumni Association, who are also instrumental for helping us bring this panel about. And so now I'm going to throw it over to the panelists and ask everyone to introduce themselves. I'm going to go ahead and start with who I can see on my screen. And so right next to me, right here, it's sort of like, what was that? The Hollywood Squares over here. So we've got Don Berg, and I'll let Don introduce himself, and then he can identify the next panelist who should go.
All right. Yeah, so my path into education from Reed, well, it's a little complicated, but I actually dropped out of Reed to get became a certified professional nanny. and didn't finish my Reed degree until 20 years later, in 2012. So for me, it was, there was a prompt about, Martin Luther King saying that teaching is a calling, and I would say that that's true for me. And so part of my process was realizing, like, going and becoming a certified professional nanny was part of the path of realizing, like, babies are cute, but I like to hang out with kids who can communicate more and have more going on. So my real sweet spot for kids is the kind of early elementary ages, really. And so I actually ended up homeschooling other people's kids for about 5 years. Didn't work out a sustainable business model, did a variety of things. So I have, on the whole, probably 15 or 20 years of experience leading children, but not in a classroom. And so part of what I ended up doing after leaving Reed was being a micro school entrepreneur before that was a thing, and now it is a thing. Would have been much easier if I had things like the internet available to do it. But for me, the path has led. I like I said, I finished my degree in 2012 in psychology. And then was actually working in local environmental politics in Portland. I was co-founder of a organization called Portland Clean Air. Did that for 8 years and was doing education kind of, I was writing books and doing things on the side. But then 2020, I decided to leave the environmental nonprofit behind and focused on my writing. So last year I had a book come out called Schooling for Holistic Equity, How to Manage the Hidden Curriculum in K-12, where I was really focused on bridging the gap between sort of mainstream schooling and the kinds of schools that are very different from the mainstream that I studied for my thesis. For instance, I studied 2 schools in the Portland area that were where every class that a child took was something they chose. There was no required classes. The schools didn't require a class, so they were self-selecting their own educational path, and this was K through 12 in both cases, and found that they actually maintain intrinsic motivation for the regular mundane stuff of school, in contrast to 30 years of 40 years now data that mainstreams doesn't do that. The intrinsic motivation and engagement decline throughout the process. So my book was really kind of how to bridge what I knew from psychology to be how motivation works, and then how schools actually operate. And so trying to catalyze some transformation. And I'm actually working on another book now, which smaller. The other one was rather long. But now I'm basically positioning myself to do consulting to schools, to do work to help the organizational and larger systems change kind of process. So yeah.
And Don, I hate to cut you off, but this is a quick
fine.
introduction because we're going to talk more about how we kind of got
Great.
where we are. So I'm going to go ahead and ask Alyssa or A to go ahead and introduce themselves. And then I apologize for cutting you off, but I know we want to get to the heart of how we got here with some of our questions.
Cool.
Hi, I'm Alyssa. I don't know, I was trying to change my name and having some difficulty. I graduated 2001 and was doing nonprofit stuff. 2006, got into elementary ed. I had no experience before Reed with elementary ed, but I did have experience with being neurodivergent and having neurodivergent friends in a Texas public high school. Half of my friends dropped out. It wasn't because their IQs were low or they were unworthy, but that really started me thinking, like, why are people dropping out who could be getting scholarships to Reed like I did? And then I worked in elementary schools in Seeds? It was called Seeds then, I think. And I went and got my MAT at Lewis and Clark, and I've been elementary teacher since then. Thank you. In Portland.
And I know I asked folks to introduce their others, but I'm going to go ahead and keep this rolling. Why don't we turn it to Lucia or Lucia? And I apologize, I've only read your name.
It's pronounced Lucia, or it rhymes with fuchsia, which I guess is the color I'm wearing right now. I'm in Fairbanks, Alaska. Our electricity just went out, and I only have 19% on my iPad, so we'll see how long I last. I'm a teacher. I'm a middle school teacher at a Waldorf-inspired charter school. I backed into teaching about 17 years ago. It was kind of a, I don't know, maybe a second career. I didn't really have a first career. I did a whole bunch of different things. I have worked in just kind of all the different realms of education. I have worked in an administrative capacity. I have been on a school board. I was the president of a small school district in Alaska. And now I'm a teacher. I can tell you straight up, that's the best role in education. It's just a lot of fun. I'm going to borrow Don's phrase. Sweet spot for me is middle school kids. Like, I love these 11, 12, 13, 14 kind of stinky butthead kids. It's just every day is something, you know, and I'm fortunate at my school, we loop with kids. So I'm teaching 7th grade this year. I have almost all the same kids that I had the year before. And, you know, we started school a week and a half ago, and we're just doing all this stuff, and I know them and they know me. And it's, you know, all that kind of difficulty of getting to know each other and getting accustomed to each other last year has really paid off. I'm also here with a mission. Alaska needs teachers. So whatever I can do in this capacity to encourage Reed alumni, Reed graduates to come to Alaska and be a public school teacher, that's the mission I'm on.
Thank you for joining us. Is there anything else you want to throw out just in case you do have to leave the panel because of your power outage?
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. Oh, look at that.
I don't know.
Never mind. Okay.
Never mind.
All right. Well, let's have Mike introduce himself next.
Hi, everyone. Some familiar faces out there as well. So I'm Mike Teskey. I didn't graduate from Reed. I graduated from Lewis and Clark College in 1985. But from 2001 to 2017 or 2018, I worked in the alumni office. But then my wife, who is a middle school band teacher, and I decided to jump and take a leap and become international school educators. I'm actually not in the classroom. I'm an administrative type. I run advancement and missions programs for international schools. But we started off in Mozambique for 3 years. And for the last 3 years, we've been here in Warsaw, where I'm speaking from right now. And, you know, as I think after 17 years, I can say that I kind of understand Reedies. I think the international school world would be a great fit for Reedies, and the international baccalaureate programs that many international schools operate under would be something that would resonate in many ways for Reedies. So I'm here if I can be helpful to anybody who's interested in what life is like as an expat teacher, or as expat in general. I'm happy to chime in.
Awesome. And it looks like Tiffany was able to join us. And then I think we've introduced all of our panelists, but I apologize if I'm missing someone on the Hollywood Squares here.
Hello, I'm Tiffany Pearsall. I graduated in 2009 with a bio degree. I worked with bio outreach for a while, and I've always loved working with kids. I went on from Reed to pursue a master's in teaching from Lewis and Clark, and graduated at the peak of the recession, in which thousands of people were lining up to apply for a single part-time teaching substitute job. The job that I got was a 3 hours a day, 3 days a week preschool job as an assistant. The pay was garbage, but I running and screaming from older kids to preschoolers. I love working with the 3 to 5 age group. And after working in a public preschool for a while, I jumped ship and started my own childcare center in the Columbia River Gorge. It's a nonprofit childcare center that takes children 6 weeks to 5 years. It's an interesting thing working in childcare, where we're constantly validating our experiences and trying to fight for some sort of equal pay to public school teachers, which also isn't great, but also knowing that the people who work with the youngest children need the most training because they are constantly working with nonverbal children whose parents have no idea what's going on, basically. So that's where I am now. I run Play Frontier, and we're building a new building across the street that doesn't have great Wi-Fi yet.
Thanks, everyone. I'm struggling with, I have a bum thumb and it's making me not be able to hit the unmute very easily. Well, I want to thank everyone for being here. And Dawn really teed up our first question. And so I'm going to actually ask Dawn to answer it and let you finish your story that you started to share with us earlier. Sure. And that first question is that, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, teaching is not a job, it's a calling. And I'm asking all of the panelists, but starting with Dawn, were you called to teach or to a career in education for those of you who aren't teachers? And if so, how? And if not, what led you to the profession?
Yeah, so I mentioned before, it was a calling for me. My calling was more of nurturing children. And how to do that. When I went through mainstream schools in my K-12 experience, mainstream public schools, and while I loved learning, I didn't love school. And when about 6th grade or so, my mom asked me, or someone asked me, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I said, "A student, not a teacher." Because I realized in reflection on it later, I realized that what I'd really gotten clear on was that it wasn't going to help to switch from one side of the teacher's desk to the other if it was the same kind of classroom setup that I had growing up. So that's why a lot of my focus has been, one, being a nanny, but then when I got into education, more homeschooling their kids was sort of like the way of approaching the educative process more from a not a formal lessons and academic focused perspective, but more from how humans are engaging with reality around them, and how kids are engaging with what the tools of the culture and what's around and available. So that became the place. And then I eventually discovered that there were actually schools all over the world that do it, versions of that. And so that's been my focus since then is I see there's an underlying nurturing process that needs to happen, and then academics and kind of the stuff that's typically associated with schools needs to be layered on top of that. And I think that what the mainstream, where it falls down, is it seems to have those two things backwards, is as if the academics could come first and not the nurturing. And there's historical reasons for that and a variety of things, but it needs to change. So that's what guides my work. And it still comes down to how can we make an environment in which children can learn to the utmost and learn as much as possible.
Okay. Tiffany, I heard you speak to some of these themes around early childhood, and I'm curious if you have anything you'd like to add here about your calling to work in the grade levels you work in.
Yeah. For me, part of it was disagreeing with how mainstream education was fundamentally functioning for children. And this magical realization that once you go below 5, you can learn through play and you can have experiential education, and it's valued and honored and supported in a way that you have to push the boulder uphill for older grades. And so a big part of it for me is that I really deeply believe that every human learns best through play, and that playing with 3 to 5-year-olds is the most pure, lovely form of play, at least for me. And I also really believe that pushing up towards the academics and pushing that play back up through the mainstream is fundamentally done at that age level. And that until you can make the change you want to see, nobody who's lived it can truly understand it. Or that's not right. Unless you've lived it, you can't truly understand it. And so preschool to me is that magical zone of, this is how I believe humans learn best, and watch and see how lovely it is. That's a big part of it for me.
Alyssa, I heard similar themes when you were sharing about your work, and you are in more of the mainstream K-5 environment.
So I was working with Right Around Portland and SMART, these educational nonprofits that get books and reading into kids' hands, that do free writing workshops to build community around Portland. And so I was working in these schools, but not as a teacher. And I love reading. I've always loved reading. It's definitely a deep passion that I have. I love getting lost in the reading zone. And I started to want to bring that joy to the elementary level. And then I had this like anger that my friends, my people, our people who are creative, like, you know, interesting, vibrant people were not being served by public education. You know, in Texas, as you can imagine, there's not even teacher unions there. It's real bad. But I was served because I, you know, was into AP Bio and whatever. So I'm like, well, this isn't fair. This isn't just. And here's a way that I can help do equity. I can help make it more equitable by teaching kids in the schools that they can love reading and books, and that they can escape from, I'm working in mostly low income schools, a lot of trauma, a lot of homelessness. You can escape from the horrors of your life and give yourself some therapeutic feedback through reading. I mean, play as well, for sure. Like, I feel in a lot of ways like my husband, who's also a teacher, and I are like undercover. Like, we don't agree with the school system. It's all, there's so many things wrong, but here we are trying to make it survivable so that kids feel safe. And a lot of my colleagues we're all on the same page. You know, we want children to get what is best for children. And we're working within this system because this is what the children can afford. It's free. Yeah. So that's kind of what drove me and kind of still drives me.
And Lucia, you're also working, you're in a more of a non-traditional setting, it sounds like.
Yeah, I'm currently working at a Waldorf-inspired charter school. We have a play-based kindergarten. Yay, Tiffany, play goes a long way. To answer your original question, teaching was not a calling for me. And when teaching, it's a tricky question, because I think I want people to understand you don't have to have some big spiritual upwelling that leads you into teaching to be like a really effective teacher. I have worked with teachers who were in for 5 years and out, and they gave it everything for 5 years. And then they realized, like, I have kids to raise, you know, I need to go back to woodworking, or I need to be a mechanic. And I think those teachers are just as valuable as all of us who maybe feel like I have this calling and this is the thing that I have to do. I think the world needs a lot of different kinds of teachers and a lot of different kinds of settings, you know, public school, charter schools. I love, Dawn, that you are doing micro schools. That's such a cool thing that's happening. We need a ton more daycare, you know, like we just really need an army of teachers to take care of children right now, and we don't have that.
And I know we haven't heard from Mike yet, but I know, Dean, you are a K-12 teacher, and so I want you to chime in as well, and then we can turn it to Mike to answer this question too.
Nice, thanks, Liz. And I'm glad I get to go after Lucia, because I just want to agree with her so much that I think teaching as a profession is so, you know, undervalued and disrespected often. Teachers, you know, it's sometimes rare for teachers to be respected by their administrators and treated like the knowledgeable professionals that they can be. And so teaching as a job versus as a calling, which of course it's both, right? You know, I think people, you know, and many teachers think of their work as a calling, and in some ways for me it is too, but that's maybe because teaching sort of works better as a calling than as a job, you know, but it can be a great job. It's one that I feel like I'm getting better at every year I do it. And I'm understanding more of the advice I've been given from more experienced teachers every year I'm in the field. So I just wanted to chime in to agree with Lucia and say that, yeah, teaching is a profession. It's an important one. We need more teachers, and we need teachers to be influencing decision-making in education.
And Mike, you shared your experience, and I'm curious if you want to respond sort of both in your more recent career shift, but also originally what got you into higher ed administration and sort of education more broadly.
Well, first of all, you should know that when I was at Lewis and Clark, back in that era, you could get a teaching certificate as an undergraduate. So I was actually certified in high school social studies or history and German. So I had a teaching certificate when I came out and did student teaching. But then I left and got into some different stuff before I found my way back into higher education, which I really enjoyed. And then I followed, of course, Nancy, my wife, of now of 32 years, as you know, she's been a teacher that whole time, and I know how committed she is as a middle school band teacher, music teacher, and how she committed, how she loves that age, and of course I hear about it every day. So it was a fairly easy transition for me to go from higher ed, in alumni relations, in the sense to going to K-12 international school, because my life is actually not dealing with kids and teachers as much as dealing with parents and alumni, believe it or not. And so my world is a little bit different than in the classroom. Although I will say this, that we're doing some interesting work now with service and infusing, going beyond bake sale fundraising, and actually teaching teachers how to get students to be stronger advocates for projects that they believe in, turning agency into action. And that's really fun to get them to think bigger. And of course, we've had a great proving ground for the impact of meaningful service with Ukraine in our back door, and hundreds and hundreds of families that need help. And our school's been committed to doing that. So I've had a different role than the classroom. It's been co-curricular, I guess, at best, but it's been incredibly enriching. And it's fun to work with the teachers, but also work with parents. And international schools are run by, the boards are 100% parents, and so they want what's best for their kids. And so it's just a great environment. It's quite easy, if you will, easy compared to public schools to get resources. Just so you know, at our school, every single class has at least 2 aides, in addition to learning support, in addition to language support. So it's just just resources that that the public schools in the United States just don't have. So I'll stop there. That's a meandering story about that.
Oh, thank you, Mike. No, this is wonderful. And I forgot to add that Dean is playing sort of a hybrid role. He's both a moderator, but also a panelist in some ways for some of the questions. And so I want to also make sure that we just acknowledge Dean for doing double duty, but you may see him pop out as a panelist and answer some of the questions, then also as a moderator to ask folks some questions as well. And Dean, I thought I'd throw it to you for this next round.
Oh, sorry.
My apologies.
I saw my chat. Let's see, we can just work down the list then. Let me send this next question to Alyssa first, if she doesn't mind. What is the most rewarding part of your job and the most challenging part of your job?
The most rewarding part of my job is that I get to, so to explain what's happening now, Oregon got rid of all certified teachers as school librarians about 10 years ago, 12 years ago now. And then my district, Reynolds School District, which is like a outer district, brought them back, and they asked me to be the librarian. So I went from having a caseload of 25 if I were a classroom teacher, or maybe 75 if I were a reading specialist, to the whole school, which is really my preference. So the most rewarding part of my job is that I get to build relationships with 450 students and their families, and I get to work with people who speak all kinds of languages, and it's just so diverse and so rich and so nourishing. I get a lot of positive feedback from the elementary age because they are just really impressed with any song I sing, on tune or not, any joke I tell, funny or not, real easy to impress. What was the other question? The most challenging thing?
That's right.
Elementary teaching is like running a marathon, and I'm 44. When I was 25, I could just bust through the year, recover. Now I actually kind of have to train. I have to work on my stamina. I have to, I have to like do physical therapy and like other strength building skills so I can make it through the day and the year. And then come May, my partner and I are just like completely wiped out, much like at the end of a marathon. And then we kind of take the summer to recover. So that's hard. It's a lot of physical work at the elementary level, and that's a challenge. Thank you.
Lucia, would you like to take this one?
Yeah, Alyssa, that really resonates. I just had a great summer, but it's all about just stepping away from that. It's kind of a 24/7 thing. I think anyone here who's a teacher has probably dreamt about their students, and it wakes you up in the middle of the night, and it kind of takes everything. So I would say maybe that used to be the most challenging thing for me. My children are grown up now, and so I don't have to juggle taking care of children at school and children at home. So that's been really nice. My challenge right now is very specific to charter schools. Charter schools in the North Starborough School District, my school district, are trying to, negotiate our relationship with the school board. It's just confusing and boring, like, administrative stuff. And I'm going to agree with Alyssa again, like the most rewarding thing is just creating relationships that last for years and years. Running into a student that you taught years ago, and they're grown up and like, oh, you're with your boyfriend. Tell me, who is this guy? And oh, you have a tattoo now. Tell me about that. And otherwise I would not have these relationships with just such a wide variety of human beings. It's been a huge blessing.
There aren't enough hours in the day, are there? Yeah. Tiffany, why don't you answer next? Most challenging, most rewarding part of your work?
I'll start with the most rewarding because it's way more fun. I love making a difference in families' lives. I don't get summer breaks in childcare. So we had kids here on Friday and we'll have kids here on Monday. But it's like super critical for their development and their lives that they have a safe place to go all year round. My favorite part of the job is that I get to witness core memories being made all the time, especially when working with younger children. It might not be their first time hiking out in the woods, but it might be the first time they remember today. And it might not be the first time they've ever seen a letter from their name, but when it might be the first time that they remember is today. And that excitement to be a part of that child's life in that way forever is just what brings me to work every day. The hardest part is funding. There's never enough money. There's never enough money to pay for the teachers that we want. There's never enough money to pay for the quality of teachers that we want to keep. there's never enough money to buy nice things. So especially in childcare, the hardest part is just constantly fundraising and grant seeking and not wanting to raise the tuition rates on families, because that's part of the problem too. Yeah.
Thanks, Tiffany. Liz, I'm curious to hear your answer to this question in your role right now, if you don't mind.
You know, I think one of the most challenging things about being a central office administrator at PPS, who is also relatively new to being someone who works inside of the system instead of on the outside, kind of looking in, and being in a research and evaluation role. So it can be really challenging to sort of hold all of those truths at the same time, sort of knowing that the system is deeply flawed, and also knowing that, and this is probably one of the beautiful parts of my job, is knowing that I work with people who actually really care to make a difference and want really intentionally and deliberately to improve our system. So you know, it's that tension of, it's not perfect, but it could be, but it's not. And, you know, but we're all kind of working towards a better system. And my mantra for the year has been progress, not perfection. And, you know, we are making slow incremental progress. And I will say, over the 20 or so years I've been doing this, there has been positive change, and there has been more awareness about the importance of education, and more support for teachers, and more support for school funding. It's not enough yet, but we're getting slowly, and it can be 2 steps backwards and then, you know, 1 step forward. But I do see some positive change. Thanks for asking.
Sorry. Oh, am I unmuted? I was glitching there for a second. Can you hear me? Okay. Would either Mike or Don want to answer this question before we move on to another question on the list?
I'll chime in on it. So actually, one of my early jobs for working with children was with 3-year-olds in a preschool. So I got, you know, and having homeschooled the kids and stuff like that, it's like I understand the kind of marathon mentality that you get into. But I also want to point out that some of that is also culture specific, is that American schools operate in a way that's very different from some other areas, particularly the Finnish schools. Is that some of the pressures that we put on teachers are culturally constructed and not inherently necessary to the job. But you know, that's part of the challenges of the system itself, is showing up in those ways, and part of the challenges we face in having the not enough teachers, not enough money, is also, you know, part of the dynamic of the broader system and how it applies pressures that don't actually serve either children or teachers. And then that's one of the bigger challenges is that. But yeah, the other thing is part of the reason that teaching is such driven by more people who are there's some really nice research on this, is the majority of teachers actually do feel it on the level of calling, but there is you know, I agree with Lucia that it definitely has to be both. But it is dominated by the people who feel the calling. And I think that the American system in particular has been sort of taking advantage of that in ways that, you know, the reason we still have teachers is because it is a calling. And I think that if we can begin to shift some of the dynamics that apply unnecessary pressures, then we can get to a healthier place around, you know, what it means to be a teacher, what it means to our health and health and well-being, and then it actually will improve the results we get with the children as well, because relieving some of that pressure is going to really just help everyone in being a, you know, a healthy human being. So yeah, I think that that's an important big challenge, and I think that part of the secret to overcoming that is tapping into those wonderful things, the real deeper issues of deeper rewards in terms of relationship and life, commitment to a community, and having that community both give and receive what we're offering. So yeah.
Thanks, Don. That, I was just thinking during your answer, that flows really well into a question a little bit further down the list about what you would tell prospective teachers, right? Like, given the challenges you named, given the sort of makeup of the teaching profession right now, like, what should be the questions a person asks themselves if they want to decide whether to be a teacher or not? You know, what would be a more sort of realistic frame of reference? What should prospective teachers hold in mind when they ask themselves if they have the stamina and the passion and the calling for this? You don't have to continue your answer with this question, but you can if you want, and then I'll pass it over to Mike, since I call on him last question. But the question again is, what would you tell a prospective teacher? What kinds of questions do you think someone should ask themselves before getting into the teaching profession?
So I will go ahead and continue. One thing I've actually had, I forget what context it was in, but I had an opportunity to talk to some prospective teachers. Oh, I was a guest. I was invited to be a guest at, there's a school that in Portland that just closed down within the last few years. Anyway, there was, I got invited to be a guest speaker in this. It was a bunch of seniors who were about to graduate and go off into teaching. They were doing their student teaching. They were, it was really interesting. So I actually got the opportunity. And the thing that I was focused on was be clear about what you're up to, and be clear about protecting your, like because I come from a context of alternatives and both public and private and charters, and is really get clear about what's going to feed your soul, independent of whether it's a calling or not. You still need to know, if this is the work you're going to do, what is it that feeds you about it? And if you can get clear about that, then that's should be guiding how you're interviewing prospective job opportunities. Interviews go both ways, so you should be, seeking what is it that's really gonna, keep you juiced and alive, and so that when pressures come, as you learn the profession, you can grow into it, not just be, taken down by it. And so that was my focus, was to really tune into what's bringing you to it, regardless of whether it's a calling or not. But there's something that's feeding you, and that you want to be able to make a contribution. What is it, and how do you nurture that, and make sure that the community you're plugging into is one that has that capacity as you go into it.
Awesome, thanks, Don. Mike, your turn.
Just clarification. You just want to know, from my perspective, what should somebody who's interested in getting into teaching consider?
Sure. And then if you want to touch on the most positive and challenging aspects of your job.
Oh, yeah, positive. Well, I'll you've heard enough about that. What I think. Let me just put my spin on it from an international school perspective. So just this little nuts and bolts reality here. So one of the constants in international schools is change. Because international schools, especially the schools like I work at, which are essentially tend to be for expats, originally diplomats, and their kids, but also NGOs and corporations, they tend to be on limited term assignments, and so essentially 25% of our student body turns over every year, and our teachers are on 2-year contracts, and so teachers leave to go to other places for a variety of reasons. And that can be, many of them stay, but if you want to have a variety of experiences, an international school offers you the chance to have a variety of geographic experiences that you wouldn't normally, if you think about mobility among, in American schools, people don't typically move around like that, right? But essentially, the conversations in every international school around this time of year is, so are you renewing your contract? Are you going to be searching? And everybody talks about it, and administrators talk about it because they're in the same game too. So it's a funny, it's a unique position, because I've never experienced any professional job culture where people talk so openly about what they're looking to do next, and their employer doesn't look down upon them at all for doing that. So, if you are somebody who enjoys a variety of different types of experiences, different types of settings, geographic, subject matter, or whatever, international schools offer you an opportunity to feed that aspect in your life, and I think that's an interesting aspect. Let me just put it that way.
All right, passing it over to Lucia.
I think I would counsel prospective teachers to do maybe a handful of things. One, like, have some experience, go have an experience in the classroom, be a substitute teacher, be a teacher's aide, volunteer in a school, and just like get a sense of what that's like, because it's intense, and your gut will tell you, like, if it appeals to you, and then pursue it for sure. And then I think at the point where you're looking for work, look for community, right? Be open to, in Alaska, we get certified K-8 and then specific high school things, right? So with that K-8 certification, wow, that's a lot. Like, you could do a lot. And I'm going to give you a secret right now. You could teach anything in Alaska with a certification, any job. We need teachers so badly. In fact, I think I just sent a note to Thomas. We are emergency certifying anyone with a bachelor's degree, right? So be open, because I never thought I was going to be a middle school teacher. I had no idea that this was what was going to resonate for me. So be open to maybe teaching outside of your certification or trying something else out. And then my final recommendation is, have something for yourself, whatever that is, like a spiritual practice or a hobby or a sport or something like that, something that's just all yours. Maybe you share it at school with your kids, maybe you don't, but you gotta hold on to yourself, right? Whatever your thread is, like, hold on to that thread and just keep it tight.
Yeah, Alyssa was talking about that, the nourishing, necessity of summer. Do you want to take this one next, and then Alyssa, then Tiffany after?
Sure. I mean, I don't really have great advice for people doing job interviews. I like looking for community. I did like 15 interviews. I was getting in around the same time Tiffany was, and I got stuff. So I guess, if you are a public ed person, if you want to be working with the population I'm working with, which is the population that can't afford stuff and maybe doesn't have a house and, other problems, as well as like kids who have two parents and one of them stays home with them, then I guess just keep looking, keep looking. If you're a teacher and you're good at what you do and you know that you can teach reading, like I know I can teach reading, then eventually you'll find the right community, as long as you continue seeking it. And then once you start teaching, having something for yourself is important. Do some work on setting boundaries. Get to know your union. They'll help you set boundaries. Talk to your partner, your bestie, whoever your people are who support you. You have to set a lot of boundaries. There's so much need. I could help kids all day and there would still be so much need. I could never sleep and it would still not even make a dent. So understand the boundaries you need to set to stay healthy.
Yeah, thanks, Alyssa. One of the first teacher mentors I had insisted that I should not take any work home with me at the end of the school day. I either, stay late and finish it and then go home, or I come in early and do it at school. And I thought that was the most impossible advice to follow, but I tried, and I'm really glad that I've developed that habit, because if I didn't set that kind of a boundary early in my teaching experience, I don't know if anyone else would have told me to do that.
I just jump. That reminds me so much that like I was a perfectionist. I wanted to finish the stuff. I was staying late to finish things, and I really just had to change my mindset and be like, you know what? It's not going to get done. I just need to step away so that I can come back tomorrow. So thank you, Dean, for, yeah.
Of course. And Tiffany, want to round us out with your answer to this question. What do you think teachers need to be thinking about before they get into this?
Sure. I'll say I'm the number one no boundaries. I'm at school. I was literally painting walls until the second I had to stop. That's what it takes if you want to be in childcare. If you're cool with no boundaries, then welcome to childcare. My advice actually comes from one of my mentor teachers, and she has 3 questions that she asks about any activity, starting your career or anything like that. And the questions are, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? And who am I doing it for? And I think from experience of working with teachers, I've done teacher trainings for decade now. A lot of people enter the field seeking control in some part of their life. That is not the reason to get into teaching. You need to get into teaching because you want to process your experience with the children in your care. And that comes to my other point on this, that knowing about yourself, how you process your experience, as soon as you find that out, it like unlocks a whole new door of teaching for you. And it helps you support the kids in your care to say like, let's do this together. Let's co-create. Let me support you and give you all the tools that I have because I see how you learn and I'm here to support. But if you're on the other side of it, like wanting to make cute things put on a bulletin board, like you're never going to make it because you're not actually showing up for the children. You're showing up for yourself. So I think that's I'm short and sweet today, guys. That's all I have.
No, then that's a huge answer. And if I could, I'll give my answer to this, and then I'll pass it over to Liz to pick another question. But what you were saying, Tiffany, about, you have to be doing it for the kids, you're processing with them. I think I would say that the content, or like your expertise of the content, or you delivering content, is an extremely small part of the job, like smaller part of the job than people expect when they're like, well, I want to be an English teacher. I love like reading, that is not, I think, reason enough to be a teacher. And I think that people who get into education because they were great at school, they love the content, and they want to use that, you run into a wall real quick, because they're actually, so they should be there to support kids, with their exploration of it, even if it's different from yours. Not to be the center of attention in front of the classroom, lecturing in front of a board and students taking notes like that. We know that that's not a great way for students to learn. And, there is a performance element to being a teacher. You're sort of on all day, you're living knee deep in your content, but that's not the focus. And I think that that's what I would say, that you have to have a different focus than, well, I'm good at math, so I'll be a math teacher.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I just want to follow up on that. If for prospective teachers, I would say if there was something you were particularly bad at in school and you figured out somewhere along the way, like I got it figured out. That's what you want to teach. The thing that you're good at, you are going to be a crappy teacher. I love reading. I've been reading all my life. My kids like reading. I am not a good reading teacher. I know that about myself. I struggled a little bit with math. My daughter struggled a lot. I love teaching math. That works for me. So like learning these things, but I think it's counterintuitive. The thing that you're bad at, if you figured out how to handle it, that's probably going to be an awesome thing for you to teach. You're going to bring a lot of empathy to that topic.
I love that response, and it calls to mind research around how the best athletes make the worst coaches, because it just comes because it comes naturally to those athletes, and they never really had to go engage in that metacognitive process of figuring out what it is that they have to unpack in order to get there. And my advice along with that would also be around your mindset and how you approach failure, because how you yourself approach setbacks will model for the students in your care how they will approach setbacks. And if we approach them as learning opportunities, then they're always an opportunity to grow and not failure. So many of you have touched on this, and Mike, I'm going to include you as an honorary Reedie, because also Lewis and Clark and Reed, let's face it, as much as we're rivals, we're also very, very similar schools. And I'm hoping you all, and some of you have already done this to some extent, but could reflect on your own education, what you learned at Reed and then after, and how that prepared you or didn't for the teaching profession. And this is probably going to be one of our last questions before we turn it over to the audience for Q&A. So if there's anything else you want to kind of throw in there, this might be your chance. And I see Alyssa is ready to go with that.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to thank Dean and Lucia rhymes with Fuchsia for talking about how it's not what you're good at that you're necessarily good at teaching, and how a lot of it is about empathy. And I was like, well, why am I good at reading? And I love teaching reading. I'm like, oh, because I love the joy of it. So I'm sorry, now I've forgotten the point of what I was saying. What was I reflecting on? What was your question, Liz?
Your own education and how it brought you to where you are.
So racism. I grew up in Texas. I'm Filipino. So I had some friends who are Spanish speaking, strong Mexican American community. They're great. But also there is a war on drugs during my education. So my smart friends and I had guns pointed at us by police like several times because we were teenagers wearing tie-dye in a beat up car. So I learned early how to hide and how to avoid getting in trouble with authority. And it was a threatening environment. Then I came up to Oregon. I had a great time at Reed and Lewis and Clark because I'm similar to the people who go to these schools. And then, you know, through Reed, I got new experiences like working with young children. And that really like bolstered me. But then something I haven't mentioned yet is racism. Oregon is a place with a lot of racism. It's just there's so many people who are white who haven't had exposure or education, and in teaching that's hard. So I mean, I've been a whistleblower, I've been an equity like adult educator, and again, like for me, like we do something, this is a different one that you guys have, called PBIS in elementary schools. It stands for Positive Behavior Intervention Supports. It's like strengths-based teaching. It's my least favorite acronym because it looks like pubis. Don't ever say that in an elementary school. And I'm using, I guess, just these strategies to try and create equity among the teaching cultures where people of color don't feel all stressed out and like they have to quit after a year because their needs aren't seen, because racism isn't seen or addressed in a way that's healthy for our students or their families. So I think I got kind of on a bird walk there, but thanks for letting me jump in. That's an important thing if you're in Oregon. I'm curious if it's similar in Alaska, and I'm also curious about the international folks.
I'm struggling with my buttons. Alyssa, I'm curious if you could unpack just for a quick moment how that racism that you experienced, if you don't mind, led you to be an advocate for students of color in your current role.
I guess just San Antonio, where I grew up, is like real diverse. So, you know, I have friends who are a lot of different cultures. It's like an army kind of town. And like I've already mentioned, these people are like Reedies. These people are like Lewis and Clark people. These are who I'm like making art with and going trick-or-treating with as a kid. And yet half of my close friends literally dropped out of high school because the authoritarian junk was just too much for them. It was better for them to work at the mall candy store or work at the Jiffy Lube than it was to go to college, because they thought it would be more of the same. More of police thinking that they're running drugs because they have a cruddy car, more. And then in Oregon, I was like, everybody's really nice up front, but okay, I'll share it. A while ago, and the two people involved in this, administrators, are still teaching, and we came a long way after this. So there was work that we did, but I told my administrator and my coach, they have coaches to help teachers, that I experienced racism in the building and that I felt like I was being white silenced when I wanted to talk about the school to prison pipeline with their staff, talk about the KKK in Oregon with their staff, and how these things are actually affecting our students and families, particularly our Black, Latinx, Pacific Islander, etc. families, but our white families as well, like our impoverished families. And they laughed. They thought I was joking. And I went and called my best friend from Reed, who's like an investigator. I was like, why were they laughing? I was just like appalled. Thinking of it now, I just like want tears to come. Like but that response, racism isn't actually a problem we need to deal with. Let's look at math and reading. Yeah, math and reading are important, but if families feel that the school is going to be racist to them, and a lot of them do by now, because their schools were racist to them when they were in middle school, their kids aren't going to feel safe at school. And if you don't feel safe, how are you going to learn anything? You can't learn anything unless your basic needs for like safety, respect, being seen as a human being with like actual, I don't know. Does that make sense? Thank you.
Thank you. And I really appreciate you speaking your truth in this way and using this space and to get that out and being so vulnerable. We really appreciate you. And I did hear you say that you were curious to learn more from Lucia and Mike about how they have these types of experiences.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Alyssa. Yeah, definitely racism is something that, yeah, it's just always on, or it should always be on the front burner in schools in Alaska. So, Alaska is like, I think probably the rest of the US. Most teachers are white. Most teachers are women, and that's a very specific lens on the world. That's my lens on the world, right? But we serve, depending on where you are in Alaska, we serve. So I lived in a small town for a long time and I taught at a village school. So, half of the population were Alaska Native students. A response to that, there's been a lot of responses to that. One of them is place-based learning and traditional knowledge learning. We have a charter school in Fairbanks, Effie Cochran Charter School, named after an elder. It's a 7 through 12 school. There's a lot of kids who come in from villages, and it is specifically teaching through traditional knowledge. It's a phenomenal school. They invite all the middle school charters kids to a tea race. It would take a little too long to explain it, but it involves snowshoeing and making tea for an elder and a huge potlatch type potluck. It's a phenomenal thing. Another thing I've been involved in is a math curriculum called Math in a Cultural Context, based on Yupik traditional knowledge. So using the ways that Yupik people, for instance, tailor-made kayaks or kuspuks or whatever, the way they use the stars to navigate as a math curriculum. It's really a beautiful thing. I'm also in a military town. Fairbanks is between Eielson Air Force Base and Fort Wainwright and Army Base. And so a lot of the diversity comes from military families that, like Mike said, you got to get used to this change. If you're at a school that's serving military families, they turn over a lot. So I think we're all in whatever capacity we're dealing with, or dealing always with what our society is dealing with, on this kind of micro level as it affects families and children.
So am I supposed to jump in now?
If you have thoughts, yeah, and or if you want to speak to
well,
how your education brought you here, what you learned.
Well, let me just quickly say. So when I was alumni director at Reed, I was in Denver, or Boulder, actually, at an event, one of my first events. It must have been 2001, and the local host of the event started off the gathering by said, he said, for the past number of years, we've started our gatherings with the same three questions. What's the highest degree you've attained that you're not currently using? What's the last third world country you visited? And what's the last outdoor activity you admit to have participated in? So there is this element of this notion of like that last third world country or developing country you visited. There is a certain Reedy Wanderlust that's out there. I think that people, even if they didn't have a chance to do it because of the Reed curriculum, they're kind of interested in exploring the world after the fact, whether they do it on their own or in some context. So at Lewis and Clark, I will say that international study is baked into the school. It's part of it. In fact, not when I was there, but afterwards, it became a requirement. You had to actually study abroad or take some equivalent course of study in order to graduate. That's why there are so many Lewis and Clark people who go on to diplomatic careers and work in the Peace Corps and other things. So it's built into that. I studied for a year in Munich. In fact, next weekend, that first weekend in September, I'm going to be back in Munich for a program reunion, 50 years. And I was 40 years out, but essentially a 50-year celebration of the year in Munich program. Those are incredibly formative experiences, and I haven't stopped traveling, and meeting people. Now, on to the question of racism. I'm a 60-year-old white guy, right? So what I'm telling you is what I read and kind of hear and see. So, and this is going to be like, strings of things. So on the hiring front in international schools, and let me also say that Roman chimed in earlier. Roman's in Bonn, so he's able to chime into it. He can correct me or disagree or agree. But in international schools, they're going through a change. And maybe it's late in responding to some of these changes, but international school hiring is speed dating. Literally, you go to these job fairs, and if they have openings, you talk about it either online or in person, and they look at your resume, and they'll say, "Oh, let's set up an interview," and the next day or the day after, you'll have an interview, and that night you may have a job offer. So literally, you're going through these compressed things. Increasingly, when I started this thing 6 years ago, it was standard practice that you had on your resume, you had your picture. That's gone because of the pushback. That they're saying we cannot do that. That is unfair because there was so much bias. And because so many schools are in a tough position because their parents have their own racism and they want a certain type of teacher. And that teacher mostly is a white teacher. And so international schools are struggling to break out of that. And we have kids, 20% of our student body is from Korea. They are incredibly traditional and conservative broadly characterized. They don't embrace a lot of the diversity talk that we talk about in American education. They don't. And so, you have these different cultures have their own racial biases that you're dealing with that are all wrapped into this stew. And, so our school has a commitment to being affirmative, safe, and welcoming, and blah, blah, blah. And we have parents who are pushing back against, because they think we're pushing an agenda, as opposed to just trying to create a school where people feel like that that they're welcome. So I think these schools are in many ways a microcosm of some of the ills that plague our world. I don't know. That's what I think.
That's really helpful. Thank you. And we are going to, I apologize if others want to chime in. This might be your last chance before we turn it over to our audience for some of their questions. We have about 15 more minutes. And I want to make sure we also get a chance to hear from the folks who've joined us today. The process we'll use is for you to either raise your hand or to put the question in the chat. And then while you're sort of thinking about questions, I'll let anyone else who wants to speak to that last question respond. Go ahead, Dean.
Yeah, I'd like to share a story real quick. I'm so glad I became a linguistics major, because I started that for reasons that no longer made sense by the time I had studied more about language acquisition and linguistic diversity. I was like a pedantic grammar snob who thought like language was cool and everything. But linguistics education at Reed made me really question how baked into American education is the idea that to do well in school sort of presupposes that you're really fluent in a certain variety of English. And while I was at Reed, there was news from my hometown, Elgin, Illinois, where I grew up, that the school district I had been in, K through 12, was sued for violating the Constitution by having two separate but equal gifted programs. They had one for students who passed the entrance exam to be in the gifted program, and another for students who passed the same entrance exam to be in the program, but also had previously been designated as multilingual learners and had designated out of that by passing the English proficiency tests as well. So even though these students were no longer receiving language support services, the fact that they previously had, the school thought, well, you know what, if we have a separate gifted program for the gifted students who are also multilingual, that'll be a great environment for them. And that made me realize how the artificialness of how non-diverse my program was that I was in. And it really just, made it real for me that there are so many biases, against students who don't speak English at home or speak English as well as other languages that really needed to be addressed. So that was a big kind of eye-opening moment for me, finding out, oh gosh, my my school program was way more racist than I realized at the time, but they did something about it. So.
Thank you, Dean. And Tiffany or Dawn, do you have any closing thoughts for us? We'll start with Tiffany and then we can turn to Dawn before we, and then I'll ask Roman to chime in with your response as well that you mentioned in the chat.
Hard to follow up. I feel like y'all are saying amazing things. I think another closing point that I'd like to add is that America's history of school and childcare is based on this division of minorities and not minorities and rich white people, right? Like childcare comes from, if you don't have a minority nanny at home, we need to fancy up childcare and call it preschool and make you pay for it. And so I think my closing thought to future new teachers is that no matter where you're entering the education system, your fundamental role is to care for those children as a caregiver. And if you're not willing to do that because you're a teacher, not a caregiver, then you need to really reassess why you're in this field.
Actually, I'll build on that a little bit because the manuscript I'm currently working on is basically making that point in different language. And so yeah, I guess there's for me, I guess just my closing thought before we go to questions is that I think that there's a rich conversation to be had, maybe a separate event, just on sort of what the system parameters kind of are and how we navigate just what that system is, and the underlying dynamics that perpetuate the racism and other forms of oppression. So I think I'll just leave it at that, and let's open it up to more questions.
Aiden put a question in the chat bar here, asking if there are any particular ways we all could recommend discovering what specifically, a passion for teaching should be realized as, right? You want to teach, but you're not sure what grade, what subject, what content. My quick cheat code for that is that if you become a language teacher, you can teach anything you want while also teaching the language you're using to discuss that topic or content. So that's kind of an aspect of language teaching that I think is really special. You can have a unit on literally any topic if you'd like, and teach the sort of meta language through that. But yeah, who else has an answer to Aiden's question that they want to share?
I'll jump in. I feel like summers were really valuable for me in that I often picked up summer jobs working with different age groups at different camps and different experiences and different styles. And it allowed me that freedom to try a lot of different things before I really zoned in on where I wanted to pursue more. And it honestly was pretty easy because spending a week at middle school science camp was terrifying, but sign me up for third grade summer camp all the time. So, making sure that you're trying a lot of different things in maybe that non-pressured format of this is the rest of my life venue would be the best. I also volunteered a lot in schools while I was at Reed, and through that was able to just like show up and volunteer in classrooms. No teacher is going to tell you no. So if you show up at a public school and you say, I would like to learn about third graders, they'll say, great, here's a million things you could do to help. So I think putting yourself out there for some volunteer work is also really valuable.
It might not be so much a subject that you have a passion for, but an age level. So I think Tiffany's recommendation is great, just trying out like different age groups and just seeing which age group resonates for you. And then if you're curious, so like if you're a fundamentally curious person, then how kids learn it's got to be like one of the most fascinating things to dive into and figure out. And it doesn't matter what it is they're learning, history or writing or math or how to do art. I feel like you might surprise yourself and find something that you never thought that you would love. You love because you love 9-year-olds, or you love high school students, or you love the 3 to 5 age group.
Something I like to tell people, I used to run a college and career counseling business, is a quote from, I believe it's from Mr. Money Mustache. Google it, if you know what I'm talking about. And he said that the purpose of work is to create, but the purpose of making money is to have enough money. And one of the things that I think is pretty awesome about teaching and careers in education is that you get to create at work and make money doing it. So the purpose of that quote, of course, is to point out that you may need to have your day job in addition to your creative job, right? But I think a lot of us go into this because it really is a creative art, and it's that heart work in addition to head work, in addition to social work, really. And it's an intellectual pursuit. And, that fun moment when the student does the cognitive load of taking on the information and then processing it for themselves and turning it into something. Like Tiffany said, it may have seen that letter today or other times, but today is the day they remember it. Is so rewarding and gratifying. And then kind of the details are just details, you know, what you end up teaching and what levels you end up are where your heart feels most happy and where it can sing. But I think, as others have shared, you really have to try out a few different places in order to figure out where that is. And I know we have educators in the audience as well. And this doesn't have to be super formal if others want to chime in what y'all think. The way my iPad is set up, I have a hard time reading the chat and seeing everyone, but I'll read what Roman said, that it resonates with Roman, and it's particularly true for foreign world language teachers who not only curate content, reproducing workbook pages, etc., but also producing their own exercises, presentations, digesting and reproducing that info for students. Roman, is there anything more you want to add to what you just shared with us?
Hi, everyone. Good evening. I did not have the intention of turning on my camera or unmuting at any point because it's been a long day out. It's 11:25 p.m. here in Germany. Was out with friends all day. But I've really enjoyed listening to everything that everyone had to share. Yeah, and like Mike, can talk to the experience of being not necessarily an international school teacher. Maybe the one perspective that I can add is that I am in fact admin staff. Incredible. We do exist in operations. We're supporting the teachers. We're here helping you. And typically we kind of like fall by the wayside in these sort of broader conversations. I'm specifically in educational technology, and so there's a lot of interactions that occur. It's kind of a quasi, it's a little bit German, quasi. It's like a little bit of like a quasi interface position where I get to have all the fun of, you know, taking my vacation days whenever I want. I don't get the summer breaks, but I can leave like during the year. So, you know, you get all the benefits of like the operational position, like you get like the desk job where you get to like tap away on computers, but I also get to be in the classroom sometimes as like a specialist brought in to like talk about how to use the devices and, you know, just sort of general operational support.
Would you be like one of the coaching, kind of like a quasi tech coach?
Yeah, exactly. So like technology coach, yeah, basically working with the teachers. I mean, that's one of the great things about working in education. Teachers, and I mean, this has been said in myriad ways already by all of you, the panelists, but you know, teachers are incredibly creative, and you know, it's a diverse lot of people who are, you know, incredibly motivated as well. You put in a lot of hours of work into this. I'm a private language teacher, so I completely understand. I teach German as a second language, and you pour your life into creating all of this content to like support your students. Yeah, in any case, it's like very late here. This was why I was not going to unmute, but it's been wonderful.
Thank you. We're really grateful you shared. And I'm curious if anyone else has any thoughts on that. And then we can close with one additional question before I throw it over to Rachel again, which is, what education jargon is your biggest pet peeve? And mine, which I don't know, this may resonate with some of the rest of you, is all of the initials that we have to unpack and know what they mean. Thomas, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I would say after close to 38 years of teaching, so I've been through private and public, but I would say the jargon, it comes down to tracking. So just that whole idea of trying to group kids by ability in classrooms makes no sense at all, because they really need to learn from each other. And they have a lot of kids get labeled in ways where they can't really contribute their authentic selves and their talents to some of the kids that are tracked differently. So there's just no diversity in the classroom, and that doesn't work for learning. Doesn't work for life. It's just so arbitrary. So tracking. I was a victim of it, and I'm trying to be a savior.
Charles, you raised your hand. Do you want to answer this one? You're muted.
I know. I'm not muted anymore, though. Sitting here listening to you guys, I just feel so old. I grew up in Albina, went to an all-black school at the end of World War II. I have my degree in physics from Reed and an MAT, and my perspective is very different because I taught for 40 years in high school. And it would be interesting to have some discussions around that, but I don't know that they're particularly pertinent to what you're talking about, although I hear about a lot of the same things that we talked about as well. I've taught both public school and I've taught private school, and I have a lot of perspective on those. But as I say, I'm sitting here thinking, I couldn't be much older than I am. I think Mike is the only guy I know here, and that's when we were connecting at Reed in the alumni program. So I just want to thank you for the work that you do, because I know that sometimes it can be very thankless. And I have a lot of experience with Portland. I went to Benson High School. I went to Reed. I got to tell you, as far as I'm concerned, teaching is a blast. It's always been a blast, and still is. I fell into teaching after several years in research, and I do not regret that at all. So I would encourage you to keep up what you're doing, keep talking, and if anybody can use any experience from a really old guy, here I am.
Charles, what a perfect way to end this panel, because really that's what the goal of this network is for all of us to support one another, provide that cheerleading when we need it, because it is a really thankless profession, and have others who've come before us help blaze the path. And Rachel, I think you have a spiel you want to give before we close. And she's putting it in the chat.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. What a wonderful panel. So our next career pathways panels are in the works. Going to be a conversation about sustainability in tech. We always like to encourage folks to update their profile in the alumni directory. It helps alumni stay connected with one another. One thing alumni don't often think about, that we are often thinking about, is that students who might be interested in your career will go to Iris to look for you, and look for, who's somebody who's a teacher I could talk to, who's somebody who's an educator I could talk to. And they will find your information there and reach out to you. So if that's something you're interested in, please update your Iris profile in the alumni directory. If you need help with that, you can contact the alumni office and we'll walk you through it. But thank you all so much for coming, and I will pass it back off to Liz. Love Reed.
I would
yes.
love Reed, and I'll just quickly add contact. If you don't already have the contact for Reed Alumni Relations, go ahead and reach out to them, and they can connect you with the network, and we can add you into our list to make sure you receive emails and that